Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Hello, my name is Tim King. I'm editor of something called European Voice, which I assume people inside this room do know of. People outside this room, I gather this event is being web streamed, so maybe they don't know European Voice, so they better go and find out about it somehow on the web. That said, I should tell you that there's a hashtag. I mean, this is more to do with digital media. The hashtag is a rather complicated one. Twitter hashtag is hashtag 11 RTKDEO, capital EO, which is derived from the Right to Know Day. And this is my most important point at the beginning. If you have a right to know that the Right to Know Day is, of course, the 28th of September, not the 27th of September. If you are the kind of people who want birthdays, religious festivals and things like that to be observed on the day itself, then I can only suggest that you leave now, and you can watch the web stream on the web tomorrow. I will make arrangements to redo the whole of this introduction, saying welcome to Right to Know Day rather than the eve of Right to Know Day. Right, we've got that all out the way. Those of you at the back who are tweeting away already know your hashtag. Fine. My task is to keep order amongst the people who know more about this subject than I do. The good attendance at this event suggests either that this is a topic of burning interest or that there are lots of people who are keen to make sure really is leaving. Seeing is believing. And I gather this is your last week, or do they make you come in on Monday?
I'm working on Monday. I'm working until the 30th of September.
Okay. Fine. So actually, if you came here to make sure he was leaving, there's no guarantee. Okay. We will hear from the Ombudsman in a minute. But his departure, Mr. Diamandouros' departure, is part of the philosophy behind this event, which is, in some ways, compared with other Right to Know Day events, other events put on by the Ombudsman, contains a bit of an overview of how far we've come and perhaps where the next Ombudsman has to take us, certainly where we all collectively might be travelling. That said, I will hand over the microphones to Mr. Diamandouros straight away, and on with the proceedings. According to the programme, we're not going to hear from you, the audience, and for another hour and a half. That's nonsense. That's not the way I would like things. So please be alert, because I may be calling for your contributions by more than just Twitter. Thanks. Mr. Diamandouros.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Thank you for alerting our audience to the fact that they ought to be on the lookout in case I leave earlier than assumed. It's not my intention to do so. My workaholic habits make it necessary for me to be here through the end of Monday, the 30th, prior to the oath for my successor. Let me also take advantage of this opportunity to add to your remarks concerning a European Voice, and to say that in your presence that I'm very grateful to European Voice for the broad coverage that it provided to its readership for the election leading up to the identification of Mrs. O'Reilly as my successor. I think it was a very good service to the public, and I want to acknowledge it and thank you for it. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this seminar on the occasion of the International Right to Know Day. This is the fourth time that the European Ombudsman organizes such an event, and I'm happy that we've managed to turn it into a regular highlight of our outreach activities. The International Right to Know Day constitutes an opportunity to put the spotlight on transparency and accountability around the globe. Both principles go to the heart of what the European Ombudsman does at the EU level, and they're all increasingly recognized worldwide as essential aspects of good governance. Today is my penultimate working day, since I'll be working on Monday, after having served as European Ombudsman for 10.5 years. Next Monday, on 30 September, my successor, the outgoing Irish Ombudsman, Mrs. Emily O'Reilly, will give her oath of office before the Court of Justice in Luxembourg before starting work as the new European Ombudsman the following day. I'm delighted to have such a highly qualified, experienced, dedicated and respected successor. I trust that she will continue to lead the institutions along the path towards a more open and accountable EU administration, and I take heart that I have here with me both Vice President Šefčovič from the Commission and Vice President Wieland from the Parliament, both of whom have been most supportive to us in our efforts to try and promote a culture of accountability and of service to citizens over the years. I'm also especially pleased, I need to note, that the next European Ombudsman will be a woman. This is good for the institution and it's good for citizens. I'm delighted to welcome the Vice President of the European Parliament, Mr. Rainer Wieland, who has long stood by this institution on many occasions, and I'm very grateful to him for all that he's done for us. The same goes for the Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Šefčovič, with whom I've worked very closely over the years and whose capacity to be able to think imaginatively and creatively in resolving the problems that the Ombudsman put before him over time, I have also come to appreciate and thank him for it. Both have been strong and supportive partners for my institutions as regards the transparency agendas of their respective institutions. I will also wish to welcome, of course, Helen Derbyshire from Access Info Europe, Paul de Klerk from Alter EU, and Doru Francescu from VoteWatch. All three organizations champion transparency issues from different perspectives, and I look forward to hearing their insights. I, of course, formally need to acknowledge and thank Mr. King, the Editor-in-Chief of the European Voice, for agreeing to chair this event. One of the milestones during my 10 years in office was the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. They gave a crucial boost to greater transparency in the activities of EU institutions, bodies, offices and agencies. This included the provision for the Council to meet in public when it deliberates and decides on draft legislation, something it had repeatedly called for. Furthermore, the Union administration has to conduct its work as openly as possible in order to promote good governance and ensure the participation of civil society. Article 42 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights is especially important for the Ombudsman's work. It provides that citizens shall have a right of access to documents held by all Union institutions, bodies, offices and agencies, including the European Council. All of these provisions are crucial for the right to know. European citizens have to be able to see what their governments, the members of the European Parliament and the EU institutions are doing at the European level. Thanks to these provisions and thanks to the efforts of the EU institutions, transparency is now much higher on the agenda of the EU administration than it was 10 years ago. A lot remains to be done, however. Every year I receive around 2,500 complaints from citizens, businesses, NGOs, civil society organizations and associations. The most common cause of complaint consistently remains lack of transparency in the EU institutions. Last year, transparency-related cases represented 1/5 of the inquiries closed. To be fair, although transparency-related complaints remain at the top of the list, their proportion is steadily decreasing, whereas in 2008 they peaked at 36% of all inquiries. In 2012 figure was 21.5%, the lowest during the past 10 years. This is obviously a good sign. The complaints we keep receiving concern, among others, refusal to give access to documents or information, the composition of EU institutions expert working or stakeholder groups, the Commission and Parliament's joint transparency register, and lack of transparency in the procedures concerning EU institutions' decision-making. I'm sure we will discuss some of these topics in more detail this morning. One of my priorities over the past 10 years has been to encourage the EU administration to adopt a proactive transparency policy. My firm view is that the EU institutions should not wait until they receive an access to documents request, but should act proactively, if you please, to anticipate which documents or information are of interest for the public and should make them available immediately. To give you one best practice example, over the years we have repeatedly received complaints about the European Medicines Agency's refusal to give access to adverse reaction reports, clinical study reports and other medical data. In most of these cases, the European Ombudsman advised the EMA to release the documents. In a major change of policy in 2010, the agency not only decided to follow the Ombudsman's recommendations, it also overhauled its entire transparency policy with a view to giving European citizens the broadest possible access to all its key documents concerning public health in Europe. Don't get me wrong, the Ombudsman does not, and I personally do not, promote unconditional transparency. There are cases where indeed secrecy is justified and where I therefore find in favour of the institution complained against. Overall, however, I believe that we have not yet succeeded in convincing all civil servants and institutions that transparency is the norm and secrecy is the exception. Achieving that cultural change, creating an open and accountable EU administration is key to building citizens' trust in the European Union. Over the years, I have repeatedly proposed to establish information officers and citizen-friendly online registers of documents in the EU institutions to ensure that the citizens' right of access to EU documents is smoothly implemented. A lot still remains to be done in this respect. Last but not least, I was involved in the reform of Regulation 1049 of the year 2001 on access to documents. And I'm very pleased and wish to acknowledge the presence of MEP Mrs. Jätenmäki, former Vice President of the country, who has been a very strong supporter of these efforts for greater transparency. This sadly appears to have been put on ice. I can only appeal to all parties involved that whatever compromise emerges, it should ensure that citizens enjoy more rather than fewer rights to access to documents. To conclude, the right to know is an extremely important right for all European citizens. Only if they feel that the EU administration is transparent, accessible and accountable will they develop the necessary trust and willingness actively to participate in the democratic life of the Union. My institution will remain at your disposal to deal with transparency-related cases and to ensure that the EU administration lives up to the highest standards of transparency. In so doing, it will substantively contribute to the deepening of the rule of law in the European legal order. It will also meaningfully enhance the quality of democracy in the Union. And such improvements we certainly need and very much worthwhile. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Diamandouros. Those of you who have programmes will not need telling this, but there may be some people at the back who don't. But basically the structure now is that we have three, as it were, outsiders, by which I mean outside the EU institutions, not outside this topic. And then we have scheduled responses from two insiders. We're not being too confrontational about it in the sense that they're spread out along this podium here. We didn't part them up at one end for the outsiders to throw their brickbats from the other end of the podium. You could have done that, actually, I'm thinking about it. I should have suggested it. Anyway, I didn't do the seating plan. But that's the setup. So we have in front of us Doru Frantescu, who's from VoteWatch, an organisation that's been campaigning about transparency about voting in both in this House and in other parts of the EU bubble. And Paul de Klerk from Alter EU, covering actually a fair few, harder to compartmentalise on the topics. And Helen Derbyshire, specialising on the access to documents issue that Mr. Diamandouros touched on with reference to that blockage on the legislation. That's to give you the overview. So that the task really now of the insiders is to make life uncomfortable for Mr. Wieland and Mr. Šefčovič. And as always, the Council manages to evade things. Though I think we ought to remind people that Mr. Šefčovič was once upon a time a permanent representative, and therefore he can cover the Council as well, perhaps.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Very good. So, without more ado, but having built up expectations to some extent, I'm going to turn to Dura Francescu and from VoteWatch.
Thank you very much, Tim. It is a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak at this very special event. According to the program, I need to speak about transparency in the EU institutions, and I only have 10 minutes to do so. So that's a bit of a challenge for me. And in order to synthesize what we at VoteWatch believe about transparency in the EU institutions, I'm going to focus on the institution that we at VoteWatch know best and that we have monitored for the past almost 5 years now, and that is the European Parliament. I have a little presentation. I'm going to structure it in 3 points. First of all, why we believe transparency is important for the EU institutions in particular and for the public institutions in general. What do we do with the transparency? What do we do with the documents that are being transparentized, that are being provided to the public? And lastly, I'm going to refer to the achievements that the European Parliament has done in the last few years in terms of transparency, but also refer to the steps that still remain to be made. So first of all, why we believe that transparency is important for the institutions? It's because transparency creates stronger bonds between the institutions and the public. If the public knows what's going on in the European Parliament, then the public trusts the European Parliament, and they trust that the members of the European Parliament are there to represent their interests and to do the work that the public and the social and economic stakeholders hope that the parliamentarians will do on their behalf. It therefore legitimizes the institutions, and it provides the premises for consolidating the European project. What does VoteWatch do? What do we do at VoteWatch? We have continuously monitored the activity in the European Parliament since May 2009, so we launched our activity before the previous European elections, and we do collect information on almost everything that goes on in the European Parliament. We focus on the parliamentary work and the political work of the members, so the speeches, the questions, and the amendments, the reports, but most importantly, because we're called VoteWatch, we monitor the votes. So we're interested to know and to let the public know what each of the members of the European Parliament, what each of the political groups stands for in the Parliament. Why do we do that? We do that because we believe, also now speaking about the elections that come next year, we believe that the public will come to vote in the elections, in the European elections, not only because they believe that the European Parliament is important, but mainly if they know what each of the politicians, what each of the political group stands for in the Parliament, and that's our added value to this project. How exactly we use this information, how exactly we make the activity of the institutions more transparent, because it's not only about having access to documents. This is the first part of the transparency process, but the second part, and equally important, is to try to make this information, to try to make these documents understandable by the general public, so by those who are not necessarily experts in EU affairs. So I'm going to just show you a screenshot from our main website, VoteWatch.eu, and this is the key And the core activity that we do is to show how members of the European Parliament have voted on every piece of legislation voted in the European Parliament. I'm talking about only votes in the plenary, because that's what we have access to, and that's also something that I will come back a little bit later. And we show, for example, this is the vote on internal market for services. This is a non-legislative document. That was voted at the latest EP plenary in Strasbourg. We collect the information from the minutes of the European Parliament, and we show how each member of the European Parliament voted, so who voted in favor, who voted against, in this case strengthening the internal market in services. We don't make any value judgments. We don't say what was the right way to vote, but we present this factual information on the website, and then the specialists in this area can take it further and analyze it for their own purposes. What else do we do? We try to make this information as widespread as possible, particularly because the European elections are getting closer. And we've launched last week in the Parliamentarium the My Vote 2014 project, which is a project that targets young voters. We have collected the information on 15 key votes that were cast in the European Parliament so far, so in this current term, put them on this website and allow the young voters to see what each of the members of the European Parliament had to say, or how each parliamentarian voted on these issues. Moreover, the citizens themselves have the opportunity to vote through this website on the same 15 key issues that the parliamentarians voted on. So the citizens will play a little bit and will believe that they themselves are politicians and vote on these issues just as if they were members of the European Parliament. And then at the end of this little exercise, what we also call jokingly a political dating tool, they see whom of the members of the European Parliament they match best. So to what extent each of the members of the Parliament represent their views. The website also allows to make comparisons between two members of the Parliament across the 15 issues. So you can take two members of the Parliament on the left-hand side, right-hand side, and see how they voted on this issue one by one. So we have issues such as investments of the governments in jobs for youth, education, civil liberties, ACTA, migration, but also issues, harder issues such as Eurobonds, financial transaction tax. And now we come to the third part of the presentation that talks about the achievements that the European Parliament has done in the last few years in terms of transparency. These are the things that we are happy with at VoteWatch, that the activities of the members of the European Parliament are now public. We are able to access information that regards the questions, the speeches, the reports of the parliamentarians, and all other documents, the amendments even. The meetings, both those in the plenary and those in the committees, are now video streamed. The attendance lists, both at the committee stage and the plenary, are public. And also there has been a step taken towards more roll call votes, so those votes where the individual voting choices of the members of the European Parliament are recorded in the minutes, and you are able to know who voted for what in the Parliament. So there was this improvement in the rules of procedure so that all final votes on legislative issues are now by roll call, and we know what each parliamentarian stands for. So these are the achievements. However, there are still some steps to be taken. And first of all, and the most asked for, is the availability of information with regard to how members of the Parliament voted at committee stage. We receive a lot of requests from the citizens whenever they know that there has been an important vote cast in the committee. Everybody is asking us, where is that vote? And unfortunately, we have to answer them that was a vote at the committee stage, was not in the plenary, and at committee stage there is no no possibility to track how the MEPs voted. As you know, there has been this initiative last year, in the spring of last year, so that some of the votes at committee stage, the final votes on legislative issues, to also become by default a roll call. However, this initiative unfortunately was defeated in the Constitutional Affairs Committee by 14 votes against to 8 in favor, with the support of the smaller groups, but with the opposition of the bigger groups in the House. We hope, however, that this issue will be rediscussed in the new Parliament. Also, we hope and we push for more transparency on non-legislative reports that are voted in the European Parliament. There are many instances when resolutions, non-legislative resolutions, but with high profile, are voted in the plenary by show of hands. And we have examples of the first vote on the SWIFT agreement, which was not by roll call, and the public was asking how the members of the Parliament voted, and we were forced to tell them that this was not transparent enough for us to report on who stood for what. Also, lastly, a more technical point is that we believe that all electronic votes cast in the EP plenary could become easily roll call, since it is the same amount of time and the same amount of effort that the parliamentarians spend to cast an electronic vote, and we don't see any good reason for which these shouldn't be recorded in the minutes. So this concludes the little presentation, and I will finish, but not before congratulating the Ombudsman for his work during these years, and for the steps taken in the direction of transparency. Also congratulating the Parliament for the steps taken in the last few years, but also expressing the hope that both the new Ombudsman that takes office next week and the new Parliament that will take office next year will continue these steps, as there is obviously some more work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a weird echo coming from the back of the room there. Some of what you've described is the fruit of a technological revolution. Things are possible now, such as web streaming of parliamentary activities, that simply weren't possible before. Some of the ways in which people vote, the technology has changed all sorts of things. The way you can distribute the information is also utterly different. To what extent is your perception that there has been a shift in the mindset of the Parliament, rather than just a shift in the technology?
Well, I would say indeed that the technology helps transparency, and it helps from different perspectives. Not only that it allows us to convey the information across in real time to the public, but it also makes the costs more or reduces the cost of the Parliament to publish information. Obviously, it's one thing to publish this information on paper, it's another thing to publish on the website. But other than that, in terms of the mindset of the Parliament, I believe that there has obviously been a lot of progress done in the last few years, and this was obvious. There have been pushes for transparency, both from some of the parliamentarians, but also from the NGOs, which have resulted in some successes. But again, as I showed, there are still some things missing there. And I insist on the availability of information with regard to activity and the vote in the committee, because there has been this evolution towards first reading agreements, who also make the activity in the committees even more important than before, and that's why the transparency effort should be redirected from the plenary now towards the committees.
Thank you for that. I turn now to Paul de Klerk of Alter.eu, and again, focusing on those two issues: where have we come from, and what remains to be done?
Thank you very much. I would like to start with thanking the Ombudsman for organizing the debate in this setting, because it's quite a unique case that actually 3 NGOs are given the possibility to present their case, and then having 2 high-level decision makers react to that. We're used to the situation in the other way around, and I think this is a unique opportunity, and I would be happy to put some challenges to Mr. Wieland and Mr. Šefčovič. I'm speaking on behalf of Alter.eu. I would like to say also that I work for Friends of the Earth Europe, which is an environmental organization, but I'm part of Alter.eu, and for the last 7 years or 8 years have been focusing on issues of transparency and lobbying. In my presentation, I will focus on 2 issues today. The first one is improving the joint transparency register, and secondly, making Commission advisory groups more transparent and balanced. So going to the first issue, the transparency register. As most of you might be aware, in 2005 Commissioner Kallas started the debate about a transparency register, and this led, with some intermediate steps in 2011, to a joint voluntary register between Parliament and Commission. And I think one of the most important positive elements of this whole, the transparency register, is that the initiative of Mr. Kallas actually sparked the discussion about transparency and lobbying, ethics on lobbying in the Brussels setting. And this debate started in 2005, and I think it has never died out. So I think that is a very key element, because it has been the driving force behind a lot of other developments. I would also like to acknowledge that the number of registrations in the in the register has been growing steadily over the last years to I think around 6,000. Although the last half year, I think that the biggest growth is out of it. Nevertheless, and I think you felt the nevertheless coming, as Alter.eu, we have always pointed out to a number of fundamental shortcomings of the existing voluntary register. I would like to mention 3 main ones. One is that many key lobby groups are still not registered. I refer to the law groups, law companies which are heavily involved in lobbying and which still massively are not in the lobby register. But more fundamentally, I think those groups who actually don't want to reveal how they are lobbying and the fact that they are lobbying will of course never register in a voluntary register, and this is a fundamental shortcoming. I think a second problem is that the data in the register is often unreliable or incomplete. 2 examples of them. We've identified a number of strong cases of under-reporting over the last years. Again, an example, we once, in the beginning, Business Europe had a registration of €550,000. With that, Business Europe being one of the biggest lobby groups in Brussels, they were not even in the top 50 of biggest lobby groups in the register. We filed a complaint to the Commission at that point. The complaint was rejected. There was no reason to believe that the registration of Business Europe was incorrect. Then actually we had a meeting with Business Europe, and we clarified why we think that it is unjustified low. And a couple of months later, Business Europe adapted its registration and brought it up to more than 4 million, which is about 8 times the size of what it was. So I think that clearly shows that there was a case of under-reporting, and this was not detected by the Secretariat.
Hang on, when you say clearly, can you just expand on what the difference of opinion was? Where were you and Business Europe in disagreement about the total amount of money for the same things, or on the interpretation of the things?
They had a different interpretation of what kind of issues they needed to report on. And I think it had to do with the definition of lobbying. What kind of activities are included? Is it just only the time and effort of your lobbyist going to meet with a decision maker, or does it also include issues like part of your overhead needs to be accounted, part of the preparation of lobbying, which is producing documents, organizing debates and all of that? And I think that was probably not included in Business Europe's registration, and later on they did include that. Okay. A second example is just 3 months ago, Alter.eu published again a report on the register, and actually we found out that the top 3 biggest spending companies were a medium-sized French insurance company and 2 small companies, including an organic baby clothes producer. That was in June. Recent checking a week ago learned us that these are still the 3 biggest lobby spenders in the register. So this also shows clearly that there are obvious mistakes and they are not taken out in time. A third problem is that, and this is alerted to the Business Europe example, with the current voluntary status, we believe that it's not possible for the Secretariat actually to have the means to ensure that companies are registered or other lobby groups are actually putting the right figure in it. Because it is voluntary, lobby groups are not obliged to give full disclosure, so the Secretariat can actually not check if the number is correct. So because of all of this, we have argued a long time for a mandatory register, and we had the Parliament on our side on this. In 2008, the European Parliament adopted a resolution that stated that it was in favour of a mandatory register, and this call or this statement was again repeated in 2011 in the interinstitutional agreement. So when the Commission and the Parliament announced a voluntary register 2 years ago, we were quite disappointed that the Parliament didn't stick to its point and allowed the Commission to call the shots. The Commission used at that time one of the main arguments that there was no legal basis for a mandatory register. Now, 2013, both Commission and Parliament are reviewing the existing register, and the limitations, as I mentioned before, are clear. We continue to argue for mandatory. Also, EPACA, the organization of big lobby firms, has also spoken out very clearly for a mandatory lobby register now. So, concretely, as Alter.eu, we are asking 2 things, a long-term and a short-term solution. For the short term, we want both Commission and EP to take a number of steps that could strengthen transparency and give real incentives for those who register. For instance, no meetings of Commission officials and Parliament officials with unregistered lobbyists. Not speaking at events of unregistered lobbyists. Unregistered lobbyists should no longer be part of expert groups, advisory groups of the Commission. And the Commission and the Parliament could start with much more proactive disclosure, not wait until there is an access to document request, but disclose whom they are meeting with. In the long term, we still believe that the Commission and Parliament should start preparations for a mandatory register. We also, Alter.eu and Arbeiterkammer, 2 months ago released a report from a German law professor, Krajewski, who actually looked into the legal base of a mandatory register and concluded that the current treaty does allow for a mandatory register. So we specifically call on Mr. Wieland here to stand firm this time in the re-evaluation of the transparency register and actually take the necessary steps to start preparing a mandatory register. We are also calling on Mr. Šefčovič to do that. Mr. Šefčovič has been calling publicly for a legal base in the past. We have provided him this legal base, so I hope that, that you will come up with that. Then my second point of discussion is the advisory groups of the Commission. As you might be aware, the Commission has several hundreds of advisory groups which include a lot of external experts. Alter.eu investigated a lot of these advisory groups over the last years, and we found out that a big part of the groups is completely dominated by corporate lobbyists, resulting in advice that mainly serves the interest of the companies on these advisory groups. There were very few representatives of civil society, but also SMEs were hardly represented in small, medium-sized enterprises, were hardly in the expert groups. Many members of expert groups were in personal capacity, while in reality they were serving the interest of the companies that they were representing. There was a lack of transparency about the expert groups, about the members and about documents produced. And lastly, there was often no open call for invitations. CSOs were not aware or were not invited. So even though official EU policies, Commission policies state that the Commission has to listen to all different sectors of society, in reality we saw that the expert groups were mainly an avenue for big companies to influence European policies and legislation. So again, on this issue, in 2011 we found the European Parliament at our side when the Parliament froze part of the budget for expert groups. And also we found the Ombudsman on our side because we filed an official complaint, and the Ombudsman started to discuss the functioning and the transparency issue of expert groups with the Commission. We're still waiting for the final outcome of that and looking forward to that. But then in autumn 2012, I think we had a major breakthrough where the Commission acknowledged actually that there was a problem with a lot of expert groups in relation to balance and in relation to transparency. The Commission came with an ambitious action plan to address the issue, and a working group of members of the Parliament and the Commission was established to discuss and evaluate concrete steps. So we're a year down the road now, and within Alter EU we looked at what came out of these steps so far. So what we've seen is that the Secretary General has written and communicated to all the different DGs about the need to rebalance and make the expert groups more transparent. Secretary General of the Commission, sorry, yeah. But what we also see is that there are major differences between DGs, different Directorate Generals, about how they are dealing with the advice or with the recommendations from the Commission. For instance, DG Education and Culture and DG Envy have not mislabeled any lobbyists in personal capacity anymore, and DG Connect on communication has always put out a public invitation. I have to say one thing on that. We looked at only those expert groups which were actually created since September 2012 when the Commission introduced its new policy. We also saw that DG Sanco and DG Connect have installed new groups that are balanced. However, we see a number of DGs continue to launch expert groups which are strongly corporate dominated. For instance, DG Taxit has installed three new groups that were up to 80% corporate dominated. Also DG Enterprise, who installed 4 groups since 2012, which are 60% corporate dominated. And that's also what is relevant is that DG Enterprise already in our previous research turned out to be corporate dominated, and the DG acknowledged that they would change that, but in reality in the 4 new groups we see that there is very little change. A couple of additional interesting facts. While the Secretary General is responsible for implementing this policy, we see that the Secretary General actually fails to do it by the own expert groups. 2 groups which were started and reinstalled by the Secretary General have not abided by its own principles. The Stoiber Group on administrative burdens, which was reinstalled at the beginning of this year, still has 70% corporate related members in it. The civil society participation was lifted from 3 to 4 out of 15, so that is not a substantial change. But also the debt redemption and Eurobills group which was recently installed is 70% members linked to corporate interests, and the members are more handpicked by President Barroso, and there was no open call for or no open invitation for members to take part in it.
Well, I wouldn't want to protect the Secretary General of the Commission or even Mr. Barroso. Timing is the issue here. You're running out of it. Okay, sorry. Okay, I could give a couple more examples. There are more examples. I won't do that. I go to the conclusion. We're far from there yet, I think. While we see some improvements, some DGs are completely failing to implement the policies. So I would like to ask Mr. Šefčovič what he thinks of the idea of actually having a moratorium on new expert groups for those DGs that are actually not implementing its own policy. I think this would give a very strong incentive to the ones which are not abiding by the new rules, but it would also give a positive incentive to those who are actually playing along the rules. To end with, I would like to, because
I think I cannot finish the discussion without alerting to one very specific issue which is currently happening in the European Parliament in relation to lobbying, which is the massive lobbying of the tobacco industry which is going on today and which has been alerted by national and European media recently. The tobacco directive, which is up for revision, is under very strong lobby pressure from tobacco companies. We learned last week that there are at these days more than 100 lobbyists from the tobacco industry working in the parliament. One lobby firm alone has said to have spent more than €1 million on lobbying for tobacco companies recently, and all of that is directed to actually weaken a proposal from the Commission that actually safeguards the health of people. Now, yesterday I learned from Dutch TV that the tobacco lobby is even going a step further, and they have offered packages of tobacco to a large number of MEPs. So I would like to call on Mr. Wieland, Mr. Šefčovič, and maybe also President Schulz, please look into this issue, because I think that there might be actually a bribery issue if you are offering packages of tobacco to members of parliament to influence them. And I think if after 7 years of debate on ethics in lobbying, if this kind of practices are still going on, then I think we do have a problem. Thank you.
We just check, because I wasn't watching Dutch TV. We're talking about cigarettes, or are we talking about chewing tobacco of the sort that is normally... It could be an attempt just to undermine the market for certain Swedish MEPs operating out of this parliament. But
what was shown on Dutch TV was MEP Eickhout, who showed a bag of, I think, half a kilo of tobacco. Actually, not cigarettes, but actual tobacco, which he received, and which I've heard from other sources as well, that other MEPs received that as well.
Well, I'm tempted to say you set the room alight, but I'll refrain myself. Okay, we're stacking up the charges against our institutional speakers, and I actually, partly because of this timing issue. The Ombudsman wants to interject something quickly.
Just very, very simply to note that I have recently encouraged the Commission and the Parliament to take account of the OECD work on lobbying when they are revising the joint register, just simply for information.
Good. Helen, are you ready? You got to go at this fast, and you've got to maintain the momentum.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that challenge. I'll do my best. First of all, to thank the Ombudsman and his team for inviting me to this event. It's a great honour to be here, particularly as one of the people who was involved in setting up International Right to Know Day, which was first celebrated 10 years ago. It's just for the audience here to let you know that this is something which is happening all around the world on every continent. I personally am going to be at a Right to Know Day event in Vienna tomorrow and in the Croatian Parliament on Monday. And that just is a small taster of the many, many activities that are taking place to promote this very important and fundamental right of access to information, which is now recognised as a right. And we had recently, this June, another ruling from the European Court of Human Rights in a case against Serbia, which made very clear that citizens have a right of access to information in order to exercise the right to freedom of expression, to participate in decision making, and to hold power to account. Next sort of introductory point is to pay tribute to Nikiforos Diamandouros for all that you've done in advancing this right here in Brussels, not only through your decisions in the cases you receive, but also in promoting and educating people about why access to information, access to documents is important. It's great to see that the incoming Ombudsman is not only the former Irish Ombudsman but also the former Irish Information Commissioner, who has personally assured me that she is also very committed to carrying forward the great work that you've done. And it's interesting to hear that you've been receiving fewer fewer complaints, perhaps that is an indication of if we're trying to take stock today and measure what kind of progress are we making on transparency, then we should recognise that progress has been made, and that's a reflection of that. I'd like to share with you a couple of statistics from the Ask the EU website, which we launched in this room 2 years ago. And it's not all bad. It really isn't. Our data shows that around 75% of requests are getting either full or partial information, or they're being told that the information is not held, which is a perfectly legitimate response in many cases. If a citizen says, and I'll come back to the European Central Bank, but we've got examples where citizens ask the European Central Bank, for example, for letters between the Irish government and the bank, based on information that had been reported in the Irish press, and then the citizens were told this correspondent does not exist. So assuming that that's a true answer, it's very useful information for holding the national governments to account. So we're seeing a generally good picture. We're seeing about 17% of requests that have been refused. With this, the Ask the EU website is a very dynamic site. We have at any one point in time a large number of outstanding awaiting requests. Right now we've got about 17% of refusals, of which I believe 10% are awaiting responses to confirmatory applications. So that seems to me a reasonable number, and from all the monitorings that we do elsewhere in the world, I would say that the level of positive responses, the level of refusals in the EU is about par with a sort of European average. Whilst, however, a lot of information is being provided, what we can identify are a number of really crucial black spots. And that's what I'd just like to focus on in terms of where we as citizens, I don't like to think of us, Tim, as outsiders, actually. I think we should be insiders. And if that's one of the issues which Europe is facing right now and really worrying about in the run-up to next year's elections, is that divide. Perhaps many citizens have felt too much like outsiders, but we shouldn't be feeling like that. We're part of the process. And one of our challenges is getting the information which enables us to participate in that process. And that's what I'd like to look at with a couple of examples. The first example is related to a case which Access Info Europe has against the Council of the European Union. And I'm happy to be able to announce today, we've just learned it, that the decision in this case will be delivered in about 3 weeks' time, on the 17th of October. And what's at stake here is our ability as citizens to know the positions which different member states are taking in the Council. It's as simple and as big as that. We asked for some documents on a legislative process, actually, ironically, the reform of the transparency regulation. We got the documents, but the names of the member states were blanked out, which meant that it's impossible for us to engage with national governments in order to discuss the positions that they're taking in the Council. It's a huge obstacle to participation. We won the case in the first instance a couple of years ago at the General Court, and we're waiting for this final decision. Encouragingly, there is an opinion from the Advocate General which speaks in favour of the participation in decision making and counters one of the arguments that was put forward by the Council, which was that too much participation, too much openness could interfere with the efficiency of the decision making process. And the Advocate General notes that efficiency is not the goal of decision making, or not the only goal of decision making. And nobody ever said that a democracy is the most efficient way to take decisions. But perhaps there are other goals that we should be taking in mind rather than efficiency. So to have legitimate decision making, and that's important. Doru mentioned trust. I'm not so sure about trust, but legitimacy is definitely very important. There need to be open and participatory processes. And this is not just something that a few of the NGO activists are saying. We were very fortunate earlier this year to carry out an opinion poll. And in the opinion poll across Europe, we were able to ask what citizens felt about transparency and how important it is. And, for example, in terms of information in the negotiations taking place in the Council, 85% of members of the public said that it's either important or very important to have that information available. Interestingly, Paul, I mean, you know this because you were involved with Alter.eu in the project that resulted in this opinion poll. We had 80% of the public saying that the lobby register should be mandatory. So there's clear support for what's being called for by civil society organisations. We need that transparency. Another issue I'd like to raise in terms of the challenges of transparency is to take into consideration the pressure that European Union institutions are often under when it comes to being more transparent. And to do that, I'll pick up on one of the examples that the Ombudsman gave of the European Medicines Agency. It is fantastic, everything that's been achieved, and this real paradigm shift in the European Medicines Agency, ready to be more transparent. But it's not quite as easy as that, because, as I understand, some of the pharmaceutical companies are thinking of taking the European Medicines Agency to court to challenge their right to make public the information which the Ombudsman has required them to make public. That's a huge concern. Litigating against transparency, challenging the idea that the public should know what lies behind about the research which lies behind the medicines that we may be taking on a day-to-day basis. So there's pressure. I believe that there's pressure from the member states, frankly, when we're talking about the transparency of the Council, and there's pressure from certain private interests when we're talking about transparency of the EU bodies. And the third point that I'd like to focus on in terms of a big concern is the kind of transparency that we need in order to understand some very crucial decisions which are being taken in real time. And I'd like to take the example of the European Central Bank. In the documentation that my colleagues Pam and Kim have been giving out to you this morning, or if you didn't get it yet, it's by the door, we've got a report that we've just put together on transparency of the European Central Bank. And what we're finding is, first of all, the level of responsiveness is lower. There's around 50% rather than 75% of requests which result in what we could call positive answers. In fact, very few of them resulted in actual information, and a lot of information not held. But we also saw a higher than average level of refusals to provide information, and often it's information precisely about the relationships between member states and the ECB in discussions over the financial crisis. It was disappointing to see that Bloomberg news agency lost a case last November. They'd been trying to find out what the European Central Bank knew about Greek debt in advance of everything going really bad and wrong in Greece. And they were denied that information. There is an appeal to the Court of Justice that's underway, and we probably have to wait a little while till we hear the outcome of that case. One of the problems that we've identified is that the European Central Bank has put into its internal decision on access to documents exceptions which are not exceptions which are included in Regulation 1049. In fact, we've been doing some research and we've discovered that about 30 different EU bodies have their own internal decisions on access to documents which in some way or other have some divergence, let's say, from Regulation 1049, which was adopted by the Council and the Parliament. So, for example, the European Central Bank has added in 2011, presumably, it looks like, in response to the financial crisis, added an exception on the stability of the financial system in the Union or a member state. So precisely the kind of information that we as members of the public might want to know. What's the European Central Bank been doing about the stability of our financial systems becomes an area of information that is excluded from the reach of access. That seems to be a problem because in the treaties of the European Union it makes very clear that the only exceptions which can be laid down are those which are adopted by the Parliament and the Council by means of regulation. And I question whether that is even a legitimate exception in that respect, if it hasn't been through that democratic legislative process. There's another exception which the European Central Bank has, which is perhaps even more remarkable, which is the confidentiality of the ECB's decision-making bodies. That's not protecting an interest, a legitimate interest. In fact, when you start thinking about the logic, if something's confidential, you can't have access to it, well, obviously. That's what a lack of transparency results in, confidentiality. So if it's prima facie confidential, then we can't have access to it. How do you argue against an exception which is confidentiality? That's something that we will be taking up in terms of challenging, possibly raising with the Ombudsman or even through litigation. But it's a significant problem given the importance of transparency in the area of resolving and getting out of the financial crisis. So there are some challenges which we have before us. Just to finish, we do still have pending the reforms of Regulation 1049. I've never been that convinced of the pressing need to reform it, except perhaps to iron out some of these problems that we've got, and also to sort out the relationship between access to documents and privacy, which are both now rights. We can talk about that a bit more if we have time. But what's very important is that if there is to be any reform to Regulation 1049, either before or after the elections, it should ensure that it is in line with the positive jurisprudence that we have from the court, the decisions from the Ombudsman, and that we should, all of us, and there are many people in this room who are working to promote transparency, we should ensure that there is no reform which rolls back on the transparency gains we've made in the last 10 years during the Ombudsman's time in office. Thank you very much.
The Ombudsman plucked at my sleeve again during that, and since it is almost his last day, so I'm tolerant, because you won't be able to pluck my sleeve next week, I tell you. So go on.
I'll try it and I'll see how you respond. Okay, two very quick comments. Again, simply to clarify, it is indeed the case that there is a case before the General Court by pharmaceutical companies challenging the EMA's right. The court has issued interim orders, and therefore they have, in fact, they are looking at this issue, and they have not decided. The good news for the Ombudsman and perhaps for the public is that the court has just this past week authorized the European Ombudsman to intervene in that case. This will be the first time that the Ombudsman will be able to intervene publicly in a case that is very much important for the public, so I'm very glad to announce that. And then to say also that in terms of the ECB, that I had on an occasion that I had a meeting with Mr. Draghi, I took it upon myself specifically to sensitize Mr. Draghi that the bank should be looking at a very significant re-evaluation of its communication policy vis-à-vis the public, and he acknowledged that as in fact being a priority. So at least the President seems to be receptive to the need to be able to proceed in a different way as the bank under Lisbon and with the crisis is assuming more and more responsibilities that will involve it in more direct contact with the public. Thank you very much.
Right, let me just, in the interest of transparency, ask whether anyone in the audience, there's no follow-up question to this question, but I'd say that at the beginning. Is there anyone in the audience who would confess to working currently for a pharmaceutical company? Just raise your hand if. And is there anyone in the? Oh, there was a hand. There was a rather feeble hand.
Yeah.
Oh, what a very short arm you have, sir. But your hand was lifted. It was just that your arm, which is attached to your hand, wasn't. Okay, understood. And the same question about the European Central Bank, since the European Central Bank is not with us at this moment. Right. And then another question to get the rest of you sort of blood circulating through your arms and hands, just and partly just to make our I'm still going to use this word insiders, but I take your point, Helen. But the point really is that you outsiders aren't receiving a direct salary from the EU institutions. Let's put it that way. And okay, so to make them feel comfortable, the question is who in this audience is in favour of committee votes in the European Parliament being on the record and it's interestingly ambivalent. And then the next question, who is in favour of the transparency register being, it being mandatory, registration being mandatory? So that gives us an idea. Okay, not overwhelming, but a majority from where I'm sitting. Right. So that sort of sets me up then to turn to Mr. Wieland, and sadly you'll have to be selective about which of these points you answer at this stage. But give it your best shot, and if you miss anything too important, I'll be plucking at your sleeve.
Thank you. Indeed, it's possibly a bit difficult to put all the single points mentioned into a reply. I try to put it into 2 or 3 blocks. One is concerning the way of transparency of the House, of what the first speaker said, mentioned. I would underline that this House is indeed very far ahead in comparison to where we have been and in comparison to other parliaments. In the German Bundestag, for example, the regular case of a committee is not the web stream. It's a in-camera meeting of all the committees. It is the exceptional case. In all the Landtage in Germany, it is the exceptional case that committee meetings are public. So if you look which parliaments are web streaming plenary meetings, web streaming committees, and even archive it, you will very few other parliaments where this is the case. So we are far ahead. And I just want to drop some drops of water into some wine, because I clearly see it as a positive development that we have the votes in plenary publicated, that everybody can see it. But we have to take into account that does not say that I do not want that somebody should roll back, but I clearly want to indicate some things which we should take into account on further moves. For example, if you and journalists, for example, love rankings. Yeah? If you allow with aggregated figures, if you allow rankings, which I do not deny, but you have clearly a reaction that colleagues who have not the opportunity to have speaking time in every meeting, that they use other things. And just to give you an idea, we have the explanations of votes after each vote, which is counted as a speaking time. And not to extend the sittings of the plenary, we allow colleagues to give written these explanations of vote in written form, and we find out now that we will come onto a figure of more than 50,000 explanations of vote. Just that colleagues say, okay, I have spoken so often in plenary. So we have to say clear that there are some reflexes on some developments which are not in the benefit of the work of the House. So we have to think together with you how we can avoid reflexes which are clearly not positive. Because if you look into these written declarations, not everywhere you found an explanation which is done for that issue in Parliament. Sometimes it's only just done that something is in the box which is counted that there was speaking time for the colleague. You also have the question of the attendance. We have some effects where colleagues come into some pressure of justify why somebody, for example, went to Berlin over a voting or sitting in a conference like that, not being, because these rankings are, for the last 5% of the colleagues, almost toxic. If you have not a case like colleague Mr. Papastamkos, who has a stroke, lying now almost a year in hospital, then it is almost toxic to be at the end of the list, even you have a well-justified political reason. I'm not talking about misuse. Coming to the mandatory register, and I do not intend to breach what I agreed with the colleagues working in that working group, because I said nothing is agreed until all is agreed. I want to have a deep and a wide process, although we do not have a lot of time. I really try that the new base of the transparency register come into force at the beginning of next Parliament. That has clear consequences in terms of schedule, and we possibly have only time until December for the working group, and so I really ask the colleagues of the working group not do a press release every day, because if we make at the end of the day a package which has a wide support, then everybody in the working group has to move. This is why it is also a bit difficult to release the minutes of these meetings, because if I say I could move on point A, if somebody is moving then at the end of the discussions on point D, then it becomes very difficult to release these positions of the colleagues. And if I look back to the results we have had on the Code of Conduct, which are clearly welcomed by the public, we only had this success of a wide majority for that because we used this working method. But I want to address one or two things very clearly. One is the question of mandatory. One is the thing that I clearly see it as positive, that you talk directly to Business Europe, and they said, okay, we talk about what we possibly misconsidered in the past. This is a clear positive fact, and for me it is clear that not every lobbyist is part of a dark plan. Also, the transparency lobby is also a lobbyist, and we should not differ between good and bad lobby by the beginning. By the way, I have not received any tobacco. So
is that an appeal?
And I'm a smoker. I would possibly take it. So no, but possibly I come from Germany, and every politician, of course, is a child of his time and of his society. And to say it clearly, this incident, we have money for amendments. I do not know a single German colleague who was even approached by these British journalists. I do not know that they even have tried it towards a German colleague. So I come from my background, and I can say in 50 years, not a single lobbyist approached me in a way where the red line was only in sight, not even touched it. So I have a culture of trust and not a culture of mistrust, to say that very clearly. The question of legal base is an important one. We will have and I really want to do it proper and without any hidden agenda and without any pre-made decision. But for me, it's, and one of the crucial points of this work on the evaluation is that we will hear the legal service from the Commission, we will hear the legal service from the European Parliament, we will hear the professor, we will hear a position who has the opposite opinion, because we need a clear base for that. Is there a legal base or not? And I'm very excited what I will hear in this meeting, and for that question, this will be the base for the decision, to say that very clearly. The question of receiving unregistered or inviting unregistered lobbyists is the next very difficult case, because if everybody has the right to receive information, why not a press release or these things? So if we do not have a legal base, we cannot act and punish somebody who is not registered. The next question for me, which is very important, how do you define a lobbyist? If somebody is sitting on his truck in Lower Saxony, deciding that he wants to talk to the agricultural commissioner, driving with his truck to Brussels, is he already a lobbyist if he is doing it once, although he is on the road for his own interest? So the question of the definition will be very difficult. And then, for me, it's a very crucial point to whom I have a meeting with. Clearly, as a Member of Parliament, I do not want to record with whom I have shaken hands. On every legislation I'm involved, if you ask me whom have you seen, I can tell it to you, but I do not intend that it is for a free elected member appropriate to record precisely, because we are also only human beings. We can forget something. And if somebody, I have a very bad name brain, yeah. If I'm a friendly person, if I shake hands on the floor with somebody, I know by face, but not by name, and possibly not for whom he's working or whether he changed the job. Somebody is taking a photograph, and later on I say, well, in this piece of legislation, I received no lobbyist, and somebody shows the photograph, then I think. I do not think that this is the working landscape for free elected members of the Parliament. And then I see a certain danger. I talked about these questions of explanations of vote. If we have aggregated lists who saw whom on a certain piece of legislation, at the end of the day, you will come to a situation where every CEO is asking his lobbyist, why are you not on the list? For what are you paid? That will lead to the fact that everybody wants to talk to a member, even there is not a strong interest in the very case. Just to show up, just to show the CEO, I'm worth my money. So, and I find this would be a bizarre effect, and I think this could be one of the best ways to gridlock the Parliament, and this is the opposite of what I understand under good governance. So the last point, you mentioned the technical resolution. I want to draw your attention on the fact, and I ask you possibly to discuss the next, in the framework of the next Right to Know Day, to discuss also with some historians. Because meanwhile I saw historians, they say the archives are empty. Because nobody writes down anymore something out of the fear he has to release it. And the strength of this continent is that we think twice, is that after 30 years scientists can say, aha, these decisions in this day was because of that reason was taken like that and not like that. And there are still some things, not only as a politician, also as a citizen. I think efficiency is not the only thing, but well-based good governance is in the interest of citizens. And when we look to that, what we had last year with the crisis of debt, in terms of speed, in terms of other things, we were at the limitations of democracy. And if you look to the speed with which the Gates universe, that's technology, the Gates universe collides with the existing society, and if you compare that with the speed of the Gutenberg universe collides with the then society, then this was incredible slowly, and the society has to learn some culture techniques what we do not have. And I'm pretty sure things we lose in this process will disappear forever. Therefore, we should twice which mechanisms we use in this context. Thank you.
Let me just tempt you a bit more about the future, because as well as, in a way, you talked about your views about your hesitations about what you thought should happen, in other words, what you thought shouldn't happen. And in fact, you're in discussing the fact that a working group shouldn't actually release its minutes, and you didn't want it releasing press releases every day. I thought you were being marvellously provocative in an audience talking about transparency, in coming out and saying, actually, leave this working group alone. You shouldn't know what it's doing until December. But as far as what you think should come out and what should happen in the future, I heard you say, well, maybe I would take some tobacco if anyone brought it to me. I might take it. I assume you would declare it. But what is it that you feel? What are the changes that you feel should happen? You've told us a bit about what you think shouldn't happen, but what do you think should positively, that would meet the agenda of some of the people you've been listening to?
Folklore, it should happen that the number in the register should increase, and what also should happen, and this is a clear point, that not only two European institutions are part of this event. And one of the last works we will address in this working group is what are we ready to pay in terms of depth when we can get more width. Can we get the Council if we do this or this not? And I think it's an ambitious, but it is an attractive goal to have in mind that at the end of this working group we try to get the Council.
Mr. Šefčovič, you have been left with... There's a little room there for you to meet these demands.
Can I start?
Yes.
Thank you very much. At first, I really would like to thank our outgoing Ombudsman for the great work, for not only this initiative, but for all he has done over the years to improve the administrative behavior of all our institutions, and I can tell you that probably I was his biggest client and he was my biggest client, so we've been working very intensely on many of the issues, and I can tell you that he was a pretty demanding client. But I think thanks to that, I think we really made a lot of things working better. Previous speakers have been speaking about transparency, but if you allow me, I think that we've been focusing on the transparency from a little bit too narrow aspects. We somehow narrowed it down to the access of information, to the work of transparency register. But for me, transparency is something much more larger. And this is the information of the citizens, how, when, why, by whom the decisions on the European level are taken. And I think, therefore, we have to look at this from the concept of our service to the citizens and how we can improve it thanks to the transparency. How we can make the EU institutions more accountable to them, and how we can make the capitals more accountable to their citizens when they are adopting the decisions in Brussels. And I think this is one of the aspects which sometimes we are missing when we are focusing on these partial issues. And then another thing is that we in Europe sometimes I think that are marveling in how self-critical we could be. But today I think it's a time to have a look at what we have done over the last 10 years, and let's be proud of it, because I think we achieved a lot. Our progress in extension of transparency in the European Union is enormous. Just compare it with another parts of the world, compare it with our member states, and therefore I was very pleased listening to Madam Derbyshire, who can do that, and I think who said that even if it comes to such sensitive issues like access to the information, which is very often a very critical point, that we are on the EU average. But if it comes to everything else, I think what we have done is really remarkable. None of you mentioned this morning transparency portal. So I'm mentioning it because I think it's very important to mention what we have done, what we put into this one access entry point for our citizens. That you have their Commission's annual programme, where it's very clear what is on the agenda, what will be done this year, what is planned for the next year. We have public consultations on all our proposals we are making, where we are inviting contributions from the associations, from the individual citizens, from national parliaments and from the public. We are making enormous progress with our internal impact assessments of every piece of legislation. And I can tell you that these are pretty thorough and pretty tough exercises we are doing in the Commission to legislate in a smart way, to be fully aware of all the impacts new legislation might bring. And of course, the results are public, they are translated in 24 languages, and they are sent out to all national parliaments and to the wider public. We created the register of the so-called expert groups which advise the Commission. We created the register for the comitology with detailed information about the Member States group which assists the Commission when it implements the legislation. So what do you have there? You have there the number of the groups, the name, who is composing these groups, what is on the agenda, when is the meeting, and the minutes of this meeting. Mr. De Clercq was speaking about the composition of the expert groups, and I take his point, and I will look into it, how all working groups are balanced. But at the same time, I think it's very difficult to be absolutely uniform, because the DGs do different things. I can imagine that the compositions of the DG Sanko or DG Environment have a little bit a different approach and to different aspect of what they are considering when they are dealing with the legislation for environment or for public health. Then, let's say, like DG Taxud, which was another example, where you simply need tax experts to advise you how to deal with the banking derivatives, how to deal with short selling, how to deal with some other issues which are so sensitive. These are not mini parliaments we are creating in the working groups. We need expertise, we need advice, so we can legislate in a smart way. And I agree with you that what we have to do is to look at every occasion to have balanced representations, to have transparent working of these working groups. But for us, the primary reason of the working groups is to get the best advice we can, so we can legislate in the smart and professional way. And then, of course, once the proposal is made, then again it goes very often through quite important transformation, because we must have European Parliament to agree, we must have 28 member states to agree as well. We have much more assertive and involved national parliaments than before. I represent the European Commission in all the COSAC meetings and in all relationship with a number of the parliaments. If you would see how exponentially is growing exchange of information between the national parliaments and the Commission, you would be surprised. If you are interested, check my website. All the letters I am sending to the national parliaments I am receiving are there. You can see it, and I am sure that you will be impressed. Coming to the transparency register. Here I think what is very important to say, and what was my primary motivation, and therefore I am so thankful to the European Parliament who supported me at the moment when we've been transforming the register in a joint, and when we changed the name. For me, the primary objective was that it must be something which works, and which works now. Not to have academic debates about the legal base, which I am very much looking forward to, because I am a lawyer by profession, and I am very much looking forward to this discussion how the article on good administration and the doctrine of implied powers would create such a solid legal base which would be supported by 28 member states. I didn't want to have something which is not working and to wait until this legal question is resolved. I wanted to have a register which works. And I think that here, again, let's be proud of it. We succeeded. When do we have something similar in the world? We have, according to the academic study, and this I'm not quoting the Commission, but a professor who is studying this very carefully, so he says that the register covers 75% of the business-related organizations which are active at the EU level, and around 60% of the NGOs. And I think that it's a very solid result. Of course I want to have all of them there. Of course I agree with Mr. de Klerk that all the law offices, law companies, which they are not dealing with court cases and they are doing public advocacy lobbying, should be registered. Help me to achieve that. Increase the reputational pressure on these companies. I am very clear about it every time when I speak, because I think that a lot of law companies is really hiding behind the client-lawyer privilege. But I think that what we need to do is to show how important it is to public to be in that register, and we have to improve the quality in this ongoing business and to increase the checks. And for that I am very much thankful to Alter that they do this and that they alert us when they see some shortcoming, so this could be fixed. Another issue which we touched upon briefly, open data, and thank you very much, Madam Derbyshire, for raising that issue. Again, we created in December 2012 Open Data Portal. Again, I would very much invite all of you to have a look at it and to give us advice. What do you think should be included more? How we can do it better? Because we want to work with the open data. We know how important it is for the citizens, for the creativity, not only in the democratic field, but also for the creativity of IT specialists, because this was behind the big success of app industry in the United States. So it serves not only democratic purposes, but also very important business purposes as well. Access to the information. When we started with the access to the information in 2001, we had 1,500 requests for the access to the information. Today we have around 6,000, and I'm not speaking about 6,000 pages. I'm speaking about the files, the whole dossiers, which some of them have hundreds and hundreds of pages, which have to be thoroughly checked through, because we have also to respect the European Court of Justice case law, and we have to be, as a guardians of the treaty, absolutely thorough in how we are dealing with this matter. But again, I think that I do not have to repeat the figures because they've been mentioned by Madam Derbyshire, but in 2012, 83% of these requests were granted fully or partially. And of course, if it comes to the update of the access to the information. I see here Madam Yatenmaki, with whom we've been sitting in different formats and different groups, how to move this discussion forward. I hope we will be able to find some solution, because I think that at the current state we are in the situation that we are very much apart, especially the Council and the European Parliament, and what could be achieved, how could we progress. But I agree with that concept which was made here, and I am absolutely convinced that the Commission's proposal is doing that. We are not rolling back what was already achieved and what was already granted to the public. We just want to make things clearer, more precise, and of course we want to open the access of the citizens not only to the archives of the commissions but also to the other institutions, because this is what is written in the Lisbon Treaty, and unfortunately we couldn't do it because this smaller change was not supported at that time, and therefore I think that we would have to put another effort into it. If it comes to the, and I will stop here because Tim is already looking nervously at the watch. And that was, again, something which is very important and which we didn't have much time to discuss. The behavior, the ethics, how we make sure that our officials, our political representatives are acting in the public interest, they're acting according to the highest norms of ethical behavior. And here, again, I think it should be highlighted and mentioned that how things changed over the last few years, that we introduced a very demanding code of conduct for commissioners, for MEPs, for officials, that we have one of the stringest policies if it comes to executing your office, that we have clear policies or gifts, hospitalities, that we introduced new elements to make sure that we have revolving doors policy under control as well, and that this is an ongoing process, that it became the culture. I'm absolutely convinced of the European institutions, and that we would be looking for the further ways how we can improve the whole process. So if you allow me to conclude, once again, I really would like to thank outgoing Ombudsman, and I think I can say today, not only dear colleague, but a very good friend with whom we sorted out a lot of complicated issues, for motivating us to do our job better. I think his booklet on administrative principles, which became so popular that 60,000 copies already demanded by the citizens, it's the proof how ombudsmen can shape the debate on the good administrations, on the good administrative principles. And I also would like to thank our panelists, but also to all of you who are representing the NGO sectors in the field of transparency and in the field of access to the information. I think it's very important. I can tell you that you are keeping us of our toes, and I have only one respect. When we do something right, say it as well, and when are you critical, be fair. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, thank you. To take a hypothetical situation, if you had to reduce your staff by 5%, perhaps it's not so theoretical. But on the issue of enforcement, where basically we've heard about a register where makers of organic baby clothes may end up with, their figures rather larger than other people's, but that's a rather ridiculous example of basically a lack of policing of the register. It's symptomatic probably of the fact that the rules are so complex that people will do the wrong things. You may, from the front, you may be able to come up with more serious examples. But in that situation where the general feeling is that policing is almost being contracted out to the likes of Alter EU, what hope is there that the Commission and the other institutions will police the register, the codes of conduct that you refer to? I mean, the codes of conduct for for MEPs still have sort of the occasional whopping example of just things that just we didn't know about. What chance is there that enforcement will be taken seriously?
Of course, you are speaking about the 5% cuts, but I can tell you that many of the DGs and all those who are considered overhead DGs will be cut by 10%. Yeah. Because we need to cut 5% from the staff, and we need to cut another 5% so we can reallocate this post to those areas where quickly struggling with the lack of personnel, be it all economic governance issues, be it all trade negotiations, which are now taking more bilateral approach, and many other priority in this field. But I can assure you that if it comes to the transparency matters and to the overall policing, that we are taking them very seriously. If you just calculate that how many people and manpower we, for example, have to devote every year to the access of the information, so it's up to 80 people who has to deal with these issues. Another issue which I didn't mention, if you allow me, because I see that my colleague from the NGO VoteWatch is sitting here. Also, my plea would be, as it was coming from Mr. Vice President Wieland, to a little bit refine the way how you put together all the numbers. What I'm speaking about, because we are a little bit victims of your success. Because if we are evaluating and assessing qualities of the MEPs by how many parliamentary questions they filed. So I can tell you that this year we most probably will hit number 13,000 questions per year. We would have the MEPs who would be over 700 questions. So this means these are 2 questions per day, including August, Christmas and Easter. Read the questions. And therefore, I think that it would be very helpful to be a little bit more refined if it comes to how we value, how we assess the work of the MEP, because I don't think that it should be measured only by the number of parliamentary questions they issued, because there is a lot of other important things that the MEPs do. And all these require resources. All this must be staff, and Parliament is rightly so insisting that we have to stick to our deadlines, that you want to have a thorough responses from the European Commission, and we are doing our best. So
on that specific point, what do the Parliament say when you said why the hell are you sending us these completely rubbish questions? I mean, it's basically, there's part of it is a policing on part of the Parliament. Yeah. They're shoveling towards you a load of rubbish, which should never reach you in the first place.
What we are trying to do with the European Parliament, and they are also doing their best, is to check the accessibility of these questions. So they are also doing the internal checks and internal evaluations, but it's enormous work, and here I don't want to speak about the implied cost of translations and all these things which come with it. And what the solution is found, that I know that the European Parliament is looking to the systems how the number of parliamentary questions is regulated in other parliaments. You know, somewhere it's a number of the questions you can put per month, per year. Somewhere it's that the parliamentary question should be endorsed by the political group. There are different approaches how this could be done, but I see it as a very positive sign that everybody is now realizing that we are getting into the numbers which are really taking enormous work power from our institutions, and which I think could be used better in the future. But coming back to your original questions, of course, if it comes to the policing, of course we do it. We do the random checks. If it comes to the transparency register, every week there are random checks on the register. Many of the things are discovered, they are corrected, and they are now done in the proper way. Not all of them, of course, been caught upon, and therefore I think that the one of the pluses and advantages of transparency is that it's not only the institutions, but it's also wider public, which has sometimes maybe more detailed information on this particular person or that particular group, which could help us to check it. And so far the information, maybe without that one exception Mr. de Klerk mentioned, so far the experience, as far as I know, is that when the Commission called upon this or that company that we do not think that your data is correct, so there was enormous effort to put it back in a correct way, and in many occasions we discovered that why there was a misreporting, because the rules were not perfectly clear. Therefore, the Commission and the Parliament have been involved in the discussions how we can make the guidelines more precise, how we can make the rules clearer, so we would also avoid some of the underreportings or shortcomings by simply because of some confusion of the rules. And I think this is an ongoing process, so let's just be aware that we started with rather low number, and today we have almost 6,000 companies and enterprises in, so of course it brings this whole enterprise into totally different dimensions and proportions.
I also clearly support that we need checks, random checks, but I think it would be too difficult by facts to do investigations. This would overload the House, and we really have to look for the figures. These 30,000 questions, Commissioner, the Parliament looks what other parliaments do, how they can manage it, but I will have a look in how many parliaments the substance of the answer is higher than the substance of the question, because we have some margin for desire concerning your Commission.
I agree.
And what about policing of the declarations of interest? MEP's declaration of interest.
It's the same. It's the same point. If somebody thinks he writes into that paper, Master of the Universe, the public has to judge about it. Only if it is obvious that there is a plausibility control, and it's obvious that there is a mistake, that can, according to my opinion, that can be served by the Parliament, but not investigation. If from outside somebody says, well, this is obviously now different, reality and declaration, then the House can follow, but we cannot investigate.
Could I react to that? Because this Masters of the Universe was, of course, only the most prominent example of a fundamental problem with the declarations of interest. We looked at them last year. We looked at all 54 declarations of interest, and 12% of the declarations was completely empty. Another 12% or 13% of the declarations said on the question, what was your previous job, that they had no previous job. That together makes 25%. Isn't that an obvious mistake, that in 25% of the cases MEPs don't mention their previous job? Doesn't that require a thorough review of the declarations of financial interest? Because otherwise, what's the use of them if they are so obviously wrong and not being corrected?
Concerning this, what was your previous job? There was, I addressed that in the committee before the text was decided. It was, for me, clearly in terms of craftsmanship, a mistake in the text, because there was the impression caused 3 years before the mandate, but it was clearly not intended, if somebody is sitting 15 years, that he should go 15 years back. It was clearly for the colleagues who started it now. This has to be, was heißt auslegen? This has to be interpreted by the administration, and it was accepted that somebody who is longer, who had the mandate before this mandate, that he can fill out nothing, because this was not the question.
I need to turn my microphone on. I need to bring the audience in. Can I invite questions first of all on the issue of the register, since we were there not very long ago? A brief. Jim Curry. I mean, he just sparked into life and then subsided again. On the register, everyone is perfectly happy. It's all tickety-boo and... Yep. Then, no, you won't. You'll come forward and you'll throw somebody off their desk and appropriate their microphone.
Okay, my name is Pasco Sabido from Corporate Europe Observatory. Regarding the register, it's just a follow-up on a point made regarding proactive transparency. That at the moment we don't have a mandatory register, but there's talk about a de facto mandatory register. If the Commission proactively published all the meetings it had, I personally don't buy Wieland's response that everyone would want to be on this list of meetings, but if the Commission proactively embraced transparency, published its meetings, only gave meetings to those in the register, would this not therefore turn it into a system where everyone wants to be in your register, save work, save all the policing that's not being done and is going to cause quite a lot of use of resources, and lead to a far more transparent Commission and register?
Thank you. Sir.
Not on the register, is that okay? Okay.
I wouldn't expect you to conform to whatever attempts I tried to make to impose order on this. You're a professional troublemaker. You just carry on being it.
This is true. This is true. I was going to say sorry, but I'm not actually. Two very quick questions. Could I say just in passing on the medicines issue that BEAC, the European Consumers Organisation, has also been accepted as an intervenant in the disgraceful attack on transparency from the European and US American pharmaceutical industries. But two questions. One, it's going to be to the Parliament and the Commission, but I have very little hope for the Parliament on this point. So to the Commission, why not announce that in 6 months' time, or from some date in the future, from then on, all submissions received on matters of public policy to the Commission will be placed on a website, subject to carefully defined exceptions for personal and genuine commercial confidentiality. Voila, there's your immediate solution. You go into a proactive default mode in favour of transparency without any great difficulty. The second is a more general question. There's been an increasing use of informal or premature trilogues now in recent years, with a laudable desire to get things through on first reading. But what happens in those circumstances is there are private discussions long before there's any publication. The Parliament then comes to a plenary and agrees what the three institutions have agreed. It's lawmaking very much behind closed doors. It's faster than the treaty provision of first reading, common position, all that kind of thing. But it suffers greatly from lack of transparency. Current example, clinical trials. The vote is being put off in Parliament, subject to discussion between the three institutions, but we don't know what's going on. So, and this is more general in terms of the so-called informal trilogues. Now, I'm in favour of getting things through, particularly clinical trials, particularly tobacco, particularly basic bank accounts, three current examples, but the discussions and the lawmaking is behind closed doors. Thank you.
And what would you think was the solution to that? I mean, Mr. Francescu referred earlier to this issue of the power shifting because of this first reading agreement. What, in those circumstances, what do you think the procedure should be?
The Parliament normally sits in public. Why don't they do this in the trilogue as well?
Well, there's a short answer to that, but maybe that's more for the Commission and the Parliament and the Council to answer. What we can say is obviously that we are happy with more meetings taking place in the public, but we are also aware that some of the meetings, whenever there's a need for speedy negotiations, may require a certain degree of let's not call it confidentiality because I see that it already has a negative connotation, but a certain degree of informal negotiations.
Mr. Šefčovič, do you think good lawmaking is served by this informality that is creeping back in? Do you think good lawmaking is served by this greater informality?
I think that you always come up to the issue that how you can do things better, and I think that if it comes to the transparency, all the discussions which lead to the preparation and discussions in the committee, preparation of the mandates, I think they are quite clear, and I think that the public is informed about them if they really would like to use all the opportunities which are available to them. And then, of course, if it comes to the trialogues, I participated in several of them, and I think that if you are under time pressure, which is very often the case, especially because of the crisis. I mean, how much we would benefit some of the things in economic governance, or some of the things which been then later on adopted by Eurozone would be in place much faster. How much shorter would be the crisis? And how much we would prolong it if the decision making would take another year or year and a half. So that's always the question, but I think in the end what we have in the trilogues, we have democratically elected members of the European Parliament. We have the presidency, which is representing the member states, and you have the Commission, which serves the role of honest broker, and you have the Commission, which is there to make sure that the EU general interest is respected. And in the end, this is the decision which has to be approved by the plenary, where you have to get the majority, and that's the decision which has to be approved by the majority of the member states. So I think that that overall process and the checks and balances are very much in place. I just read the article in the Foreign Affairs a couple of months ago, and the article was concluded by the questions. What do you think is more difficult, for Barack Obama to overcome the filibuster in the Senate, or for the EU to adopt its decision? Where you have more checks and balances, where you have the more controls, to get the whole Parliament behind the decision, to get the 28 member states behind your decision, and to do it in, I think, what is still one of the highest level of the transparency you can find on this planet. At least for these political sciences, the answer was pretty clear, that we have checks and balances and enormous public scrutiny in the European Union, and the decisions to be adopted in the end has to be approved by so many stakeholders that it must be really representative of what is the general interest of the European Union.
But with respect, I mean, what Jim Murray was mentioning was clinical trials and tobacco directive. It was not economic Eurozone crisis legislation at all. I mean, we can say we live in crisis times, therefore we will abandon the procedures. I don't deny that the procedures are there. When you say Foreign Affairs has done this assessment, you can say that the legislative procedure, when it comes to the final legislative thing in the Council, it will be televised. That doesn't mean that the preceding discussions are visible to members of the public. And Jim's point is that the pre-legislative negotiating between the three institutions is going on behind closed doors. So how does a crisis justify that? But you're giving him thinking to.
Well, to say it very clearly, this is also what President Schulz claims, we should do less things in the summits. We should do it in normal councils, and they should be able to sit in public. Then you have the discussion in the Council for the public. You have the public discussion of the European Parliament, and if then they try to find an agreement, I would say a trilogue finding an agreement, sometimes face-keeping, it's not possible for public. But if you achieve that more things are debated publicly in the Council, then and fulfilling Lisbon Treaty, then it's perfect. I see it opposite, like Commissioner Šefčovič. For me, this first reading agreement is a huge misdevelopment, like it was the Lamfalussy procedure, because these first reading agreements lead clearly that the Parliament is less involved. A lot of things not even come into plenary, and this is a clear misdevelopment.
Mr. Diamandouros, one of the things that will happen towards the end of not your working mandate, but the mandate of the Commission, is people leaving their jobs or moving to their next jobs. And one of your responsibilities is to field complaints from disgruntled staff of EU institutions. And I was thinking that this issue, you were alluding earlier to the proportion of complaints that there had been on access to documents and so on, and the relative number of complaints. And I was thinking, well, if we're talking about proportions, it could just be that the proportion of complaints from disgruntled staff has just increased so much that it's outweighing the access to documents issue. But what do you think that we are any better now at this end of a Commission mandate and a parliamentary mandate? Are we any better on the procedures to counter revolving doors?
Thank you. To begin with, I have not looked at the statistics yesterday, but I can tell you with great certainty that there has not been any kind of significant increase in the number of complaints coming from staff. In fact, originally the fear was that when the Ombudsman was to be set up, the fear was that this would be an instrument to be used by the EU staff for their internal affairs, and this never transpired. The proportion of complaints we have from staff never exceeds, it ranges between 11 and 13 or 14% over the last 18 years. So it has not.
Is that because they go straight to court?
I think not so, but I think, that gives me the opportunity to say the following. The Article 90 procedure, as far as I'm concerned, has been derailed. It has been judicialized, and it was not intended to be judicialized. It was intended to be, in fact, an extrajudicial mechanism to allow for extrajudicial resolution of problems. Unfortunately, it has become distorted, and then once you enter the Article 90, you go with your lawyer most of the time, and the assumption is you're essentially on a path-dependent kind of a trajectory towards the court. So there is more judicialization of that procedure than it should be, but the Ombudsman has in fact been able to handle a constant flow of complaints in that area. Now, in terms of your other and major question, let me say two things. One of the major efforts that have been undertaken under my last 10 years has been to push very much the frontiers on issues of ethics. Ethics and conflict of interest. And I was very pleased to hear Commissioner Šefčovič mention that. Of course, my mandate is limited to the staff, not to the political level. That is not the Ombudsman's responsibility. But in that area, we've been able to do, I think, very considerable improvements, including the area of revolving doors. To put it differently, we are in a moment in history where, using the German term Zeitgeist, we are very much in a moment where transparency and issues of ethics is rising very much in terms of the consciousness of the public, and therefore it behooves us to be able to, in fact, respond to that. At that level, the Ombudsman has been receiving more complex complaints and more complaints quantitatively, addressing issues of revolving doors and ethics conflicts, and we've been in fact pushing actively in resolving them, and we've had pretty good results. I'll give you one example very quickly. A few years ago we had a case with the Commission where members of the cabinet of a commissioner were given VIP tickets to go to the World Cup rugby final in Paris. And they went. We had a complaint that this might have involved a conflict of interest because the tickets were given by a multinational corporation operating in the area of responsibility of the Commissioner's portfolio. We investigated the case and we found out that, in fact, everything had been done by the books. They had asked and received permission by the existing rules. I then, however, made the additional comment, which was the important point, that borrowing on the OECD distinction between real, apparent, and potential conflicts of interest, it was incumbent upon the Commission to be able to review its own rules to ensure that, even though there had been no real conflict of interest, there may have been a perception of a potential conflict of interest, and the Commission, to its credit, revised its positions, revised its rules, so as to ensure that this kind of thing would not happen. So this is a very concrete example of how the Ombudsman has tried to continue to pushing the frontiers forward. There are increasingly difficult cases, and I'm pleased to say that the Ombudsman is being entrusted with these, and I'm very happy that, in fact, it's happening.
We remember the case well. Question there.
Thank you. My name is Staffan Dahlev. I'm a freelance reporter at Scandinavian Media. I have a question concerning the rules of access to documents. As the Ombudsman said, the revision of the rules has been put on ice, and as Helen Derbyshire kind of implied, maybe that's not the worst case considering the alternative. My question is this. I understand that the legal service of the Parliament has said there is no actual need to revise the rules in order to, so to speak, Lisbonize them. I understand the Commission has an opposite opinion on this, and I wonder if Commissioner Šefčovič could elaborate a little bit on that. And also, follow-up question on that, do you foresee any movement within this mandate period? Thank you.
Yes, I think that we've been trying to push these issues ahead at several occasions, and I attended several meetings. I had a meeting with the coordinators. I even wrote to the President of the European Parliament on this issue because I wanted to achieve the progress, and with that position of the European Parliament, which the first issue was that we've been pretty convinced that the so-called recast rules have been broken by the European Parliament. And by second, the scope of the Parliament's position, which was so large, I knew it would be extremely difficult to get to the agreement, especially because the position of the Council was going into totally different direction, and on top of it, we've been not very happy how the recast technique was used. So there was a lot of issues, legalistic, technical, and practical. Therefore, when I saw that it would be very difficult to achieve this overall agreement, we suggested that we should go through the Lisbonizing of the current system, and that we should try to conclude what I would describe as a transposition of the Lisbon rules and procedures into all aspects of our legal activities. Therefore, we suggested, okay, I mean, this is something for which we need probably more time and more discussion, but we shouldn't deprive the citizens from the access to the other European institutions, because according to the original directive which is in place, 1049, they have access only to the documentation coming from the Commission. So we wanted to open the access to other institutions based upon the article of the Lisbon Treaty, but in the end it was not accepted by the European Parliament, maybe that because of that position of Parliament legal service, or maybe because there was the feeling that if we would go through this small change that somehow the Commission or the Council would totally lack appetite for further negotiations. So that could be the political considerations there as well. So this is the situation which is there right now. I think we are really approaching the end of the mandate of the European Parliament and of the Commission. I know that there are very intense talks going on between the Commission, European Parliament and the Council, what should be put on priority list and where we still can achieve the agreement until like working deadlines March, April before the last session of the European Parliament, and I'm afraid that this is not on that list.
Helen.
Thanks, Tim. Just very briefly on this point, to pick up on a couple of things. It's clear that perhaps something needs to be done to ensure that the situation we have post-Lisbon, which is a right of access to EU documents, is properly reflected in the regulations which implement that right. I wanted to pick up on one thing that Mara Šefčovič had said earlier, about no rolling back. I would disagree with that. I think there were some attempts in the proposals put forward, for example, to undo the jurisprudence of the European Court with respect to access to legal advice. So I would see that as a rolling back of transparency. The Court has said that legal advice should be accessible, and there have been proposals put forward to take it out of the scope of the right of access to documents. And while we're looking at the implications of Lisbon for transparency more generally, and I agree there that we should talk not only about access to documents but transparency more generally, let's look at the requirement that decisions be taken as closely as possible to EU citizens, and that is particularly the case with respect to the legislative process. And I think that any discussions about trialogues and records of meetings in the Parliament or expert groups or whatever decision-making process we're talking about, we have to look through that transparency lens, and it's not acceptable to use the excuse that the transparency is forcing us not to keep a record. There is an obligation to ensure the openness, and that entails, in my analysis I would say, and this is something we should look at in the future more clearly, that entails an obligation to keep a record, written record, which permits the public to follow the decision-making process. Thank you.
Did you want to make any comment on the rolling back point?
Excuse me, no, I just want to say, from my memory, and I have not been responsible for it, there is nothing in the Commission's proposal from 2008 about legal service opinions. I may be wrong. Turco came after the Commission submitted its proposal. You are saying the Commission's proposal. I'm just saying that is incorrect. The Commission does not propose to change the present situation in its proposal from 2008 about legal service opinions.
Thanks.
Thank you. Vanja Škorić from GONG Croatia, CSO promoting good governance. Quick comment following up the transparency lens about Commission's advisory groups. Why not introduce an open call for participants of the advisory groups and let the DG write an explanation for each of the experts included? Of course, the final responsibility for the decision is on the DG to choose the right people and the right experts for its legislation process. But this would decrease the conspiracy aspect of these groups. And a quick general question for both Vice Presidents. Has the Commission or the Parliament considered conducting an estimate what would be the prevention of the corruptive damage if we consider more transparency as an investment? This estimate was done for Open Data Initiative on the EU level. Thank you.
It was about how do you assess that? I mean, if you're doing a cost-benefit analysis of transparency, how do you work out that? How do you put a price on? In a way, you're putting a price on not being transparent. But what price do you put on the benefits of transparency to counter corruption and other ill effects? That was the second point. On the first one, I'll come to you.
Yeah, if you allow me on first and just one word on second. Concerning the formation of the working groups, this is the practice. I mean, if it comes to the formation of the forming of the working group, so that's a general practice that such a call is issued, that there is public call that we are going to form such a working group or advisory group, and that you can propose the candidacy. Of course, it might be the case here and there, that, which I'm not aware that this didn't take place, but this is the general approach how to form the working group. And then, of course, it's up to the DG to make the final judgment, because, as I said, what we need there is to get professional advice. We need expertise. I mean, for political discussions will come later on, once we are already in the position to make the proposal. And usually these working groups are just advising the Commission how to start, how to craft the legislation before it's put for impact assessment, evaluations, and all the upcoming process. But this is the case. Concerning the opening data, transparency and the corruption, then I agree with you 100%. That's very clearly experience. I mean, we have in the European Union, the more transparency you have, smaller the corruption is. And I think, therefore, we included into the transparency portal also something which I think it was really a cultural change, that now you can track the beneficiaries of EU funds to the member states. So you can actually check who is getting the financial support from the EU money, for what, and how does it all work. And again, I think this was unique, and I know that there was even some kind of court cases if this is actually legal or not. So therefore, I think that in that case, the step towards the bigger transparency, how the EU taxpayers' money are used, who is benefiting from them, it's already there, and it's for the public to check. And we just wanted to put it under one umbrella of transparency portal. So if you are interested in this or that aspect, that you should have this one entry access point where you can check most of these things.
On the public calls, it is correct indeed that in the guidelines from the Secretary General, it clearly says all expert groups should be based on a public call. You will see in a couple of weeks when we release our report that this is not happening. We've been examples of 8 expert groups of DG Research, for instance, which all didn't have any public calls. Also expert groups in DG Sanco and DG Move, which didn't have any public calls. So I think there is, while I do agree that you have given the right signal, but it's not been taken up by several.
On which point, the Secretariat General is laying down these general principles. Sorry to bang on about enforcement. Whose task is it then to follow that through? Does that, I mean, commissioner-wise, is that you or the President? And is it Secretary General who follows that through, or what? When basically a Directorate General or a Director General is not complying with the rules, who follows up?
Of course, it depends on the individual case. But in this case, of course, if it comes to the overall coordination and the guideline was issued by the Secretary General, so it's Secretary General who polices it and enforces it. And of course, before I would jump to the conclusion how this was in these cases, I think we just simply would have to look in what really happened there, and I will be looking forward to the report from VoteWatch.eu just to check if this is really the case and what was the reason behind it.
Enough pre-publicity for their publications. There was a question here.
It's actually 3 questions. We didn't tell you, but we have a Google Hangout on air going on, and there are 3 very eager people asking questions there, so they're coming now. So one is from Paul Ryan, and I mean, in terms of what does the panel think if the European Commission, say, simply decides to not give access to a document when the Ombudsman has actually said that there should be given access? Do you think that makes the Ombudsman redundant? There's another question from and that's a bit more specific towards NGOs and how money goes into the member states. He's asking, it's Jesus from Spain, who's asking, sorry, the stuff is moving in front of my face, they're posting questions. So he wants to know how can we have more efficiency in managing the EU funds, and how can we make it more transparent to NGOs in the member states, how they get money and how money is distributed through the member states.
Who gets money? The NGOs get money?
NGOs, for instance. So I think he's involved in a project where they are trying to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, and apparently that's quite hard in Spain. But it's also difficult for the NGOs to actually get a hand on to get EU money to do these projects, and it's difficult for them to find out where money goes.
Third question, because Mr. Wieland has to run at 12:30.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And he's a smoker, so he doesn't like running.
I'm going to drop the last question. I'm going to drop the last question.
Okay, we dropped the last question for the sake of your plane. Do I dare confess at this point that I've forgotten the first question? It's about whether the Ombudsman, as a member of the panel, what he thinks if somebody ignores the Ombudsman's opinion. I think we know what the Ombudsman thinks, so we'll turn to everyone else.
Just a quick reaction on the first one. I think if we look at the performance of the Office of the Ombudsman over the last 18 years, I think we have 18 issues which have been brought in the form of special report to the European Parliament. So in 18 cases, there was a disagreement at the beginning. Ombudsman used his right to brought it to the plenary, and I think in most of the cases then we found the solution. So the fact is that we are working on this, we are listening to the Ombudsman, and I think in most cases we agree. And if there is still, I would say, a persistent feeling that we didn't do something right, there is always the possibility to take the decision to the European Court of Justice. So there are several layers of the control, but Ombudsman suggested that if it comes to these sensitive issues where we have some problem to find an agreement, we introduce this new approach, the second pair of eyes. It was also his suggestion that second team looks at the issue, and I think it leads also to the, I would say, better resolution rate of our issues and discrepancies. EU funds. That's a question which, of course, we are dealing a lot with. It's an extremely sensitive question, which is very difficult for the Commission in every single year when it comes to the budgetary discharge issue. And there, of course, if you look at chapters how we spend the money, if it comes to the administration, this year I'm very proud to say, because I had the auditor, Mr. Tome, in my office yesterday, we have 0 error rate, just 0. So I think we improved and we do execute budget well. But where we have a problem is where we have shared competencies, because there, of course, you have different tradition in different member states. If it comes to the execution of the projects in the member states. So then the primary responsibility is with the member states, and what the Commission, Court of Auditors, and eventually Olaf, if the case is very serious, does is control how this money was spent. But I would encourage I don't know if it was gentleman or a lady who sent that question, just to check our transparency portal where the money goes, and then of course it's very important also to introduce this new culture of how the money are allocated and distributed back home. My clear preference is to do the same what we do here. I mean, here you have the call for proposals. Here is the number of application of the projects. This project has been selected, and why? So the people know that the money was distributed fair, that there is some public control, public scrutiny, how this money been used. Because sometimes I have to tell you that I also feel at pain.
You can't.
Just one word. Just at pain that a lot of money and EU money is spent in these difficult economic times in the member states, and very often you do not see that the European citizens are as appreciative of this support as they could be, because they have a feeling that the money was not appropriately spent. And this is something which I think it's very wrong, and which could be corrected clearly in this respect by better management and better transparency. Sorry, Tim, for being so long.
No. What I'm going to do is to give Mr. Wieland a godspeed towards the airport and his tobacco purchases and everything, so that then I can wrap things up without the pressure that I would otherwise feel. And I want to bring Helen in on that point that's just been raised. So thank you, Mr. Wieland, because it's always a pleasure to see an MEP working in the Parliament on a Friday. So we're particularly grateful to you, and we're grateful to you for your contribution on these issues. We look forward to, if not a press release every day between now and December on the working group, at least the fruits of the working group's labours. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good journey. Helen.
Thanks, Tim. On this question of the transparency of funds, it's not surprising that that question comes from, that question comes from Spain, because Spain is the only large country in the EU without an access to information law. Access Info Europe is based in Spain for that reason, and it is extremely difficult to find out any information, whether it be about the spending of the domestic budget or the spending of EU funds. So that's one challenge that we face, ensuring that any advances in transparency that are being pushed through in Brussels are also reflected at the national level. The Italian government, the previous Italian government, did a very nice website, Open Coesione, which looked at made more transparent some of the structural funds. That needs to be done. We also need to complement the work that Mara Šefčovič is talking about that's being done to increase proactive publication with the portal by making sure that when it's key data that we need to track corruption, for example, that is available. And we have problems. We have problems with the farm subsidy data, which has been taken down because of questions of privacy, the privacy rights of some of the recipients. That's something which is really pending to be looked at, because there is a serious accountability issue there as well. So one of the challenges, if we're doing open data, is to design in transparency. We've had this, very briefly, we've had this issue with Transparency International. We've been asking for the data sets about the number of requests that are received, and one of the issues is that the databases include the names of private individuals who filed the request. How do you hand over all the data when it's requested and take out the column that's got the personal data in? So there needs to be a lot more forward thinking about how to make transparent a lot of the information which the EU holds, whilst, where appropriate, respecting the privacy rights of individuals. Designing in transparency is the challenge for the next period.
If I was hanging out in a Google Hangout, I might be saying to Jesus that actually the agriculture area probably has more experience of what to do with the data that is being made, that was being made transparent on the beneficiaries from the CAP. If he's particularly concerned about the MDGs, he may be in the development world where one of the, I don't know what the complication